Between May and July 2024, Russia suffered a staggering 70,000 casualties, nearly 1,000 dead and wounded each day, according to the UK's Ministry of Defence. This alarming rate of losses has led analysts to revise their predictions, suggesting that Russia could face up to 1.5 million casualties before the war ends. But how many more soldiers will Russia lose in its so-called special military operation? And what are the long-term implications for the Russian military and government? In this video, we'll explore these escalating numbers and hear from the new head of the British Army, who has made some startling predictions about what lies ahead. On July 23rd, the newly appointed Chief of Staff of the British Army, General Sir Roly, delivered his first major remarks since taking command at the annual Land Warfare Conference hosted by Britain's Royal United Services Institute, RUSI. In his comments on Ukraine, Walker mentioned that Russia's objectives had, in all but name, shifted from a total takeover of the country or a toppling of the post-Euromaidan government in Kyiv. Instead, he says Moscow now aims to take full control of the 4 areas it claimed to annex in 2022, the Kherson, Donetsk, Luhansk, and Zaporizhia oblasts. However, he said that at its current attrition rate, Russia would take 5 years to achieve this goal. If they carry on as they are, it would probably take the Russians 5 years to grind their way to their minimum objectives of the 4 oblasts. With this in mind, we can expect one thing. Russia is set to take staggering casualties in its effort to subdue only the eastern part of Ukraine. The final total for just those 4 territories will be a figure that has not been seen since World War II. As of July 24, 2024, British sources estimate that Russia has taken 550,000 total casualties over nearly 2.5 years. Although these casualties are only estimates because Russia is less than honest about its losses, there are a few other good reasons to think its number of dead and wounded is escalating and will balloon in the time span General Walker mentioned. The first reason to think that Russia will take a lot more casualties in the coming years is because of a shift in posture from the Ukrainian military. Its brass has tacitly acknowledged that their country is in a war of attrition and that it will not defeat Russia in a decisive campaign. Although Ukraine faced setbacks during the Zaporizhia offensive last year, it's regrouped and refocused. Despite challenges, Ukrainian forces have maintained their resolve, strengthened by international support, and continue to successfully defend their territory from Russian advances. Russia has attempted to go on the offensive, but has faced stiff resistance from Ukraine. For the moment, Ukraine has changed its tactical objectives, from reclaiming territory to defending what it has. As it does this, it aims to kill or maim as many Russian troops as possible, destroying as much enemy equipment as it can, and mitigate its losses. Ukraine's defensive strategy is well suited for this task. Russia suffered severely during the multi-month battle for Avdiivka. By December 2023, around 3,000 Russian troops were killed or wounded for every square mile they captured around that city. That was 2 months before the battle ended. It was also near the time when Ukraine was suffering the worst of its ammunition shortages, especially artillery shells, and when Russia looked like it might be gaining the advantage in drone warfare. Both of those situations are now different today. Ukraine has made Russia suffer with its drone operations. Since the invasion started, Ukraine has used fast-moving small FPV drones to inflict high damage on the Russian war machine. Ukrainian officials have claimed that these weapons have now become the most important part of their country's war effort. In the second half of 2023, when it was taking the aforementioned casualties for little ground gained, Russia looked like it could overtake Ukraine in this dimension of warfare. But Russian FPV drone activity peaked in January. When the year began, President Zelensky made the production of 1 million FPV drones one of his government's top priorities. By February, Ukraine was already on track to surpass that goal. These drones have been responsible for thousands of Russian tank and vehicle losses. Ukraine's FPV drone pilots are now so good that they can target specific individuals hiding in confined spaces, even navigating apartment units until they find the right target. Russia has also fallen behind in the jamming race. Many of the jammers it desperately needs to stop Ukraine's drones simply don't work, either in protecting infantry or vehicles. The end result is that Russian forces are now having to push through the ever-increasing screen of Ukrainian FPV drones. If Russia continues to fail to provide adequate jammers on a substantial level, its casualties will see an uptick as Ukraine gets more drones into the fight. Meanwhile, Ukraine is still suffering from a shortage of artillery shells, but it's not on the same level as during the span between October 23 and April 24, when the United States stopped sending military aid. The increase in shells means an increase in Russian casualties. Ukrainian gunners have reported recent increases in supplies, albeit not nearly at the place or level that they had hoped for. In the winter, Ukraine's Western partners negotiated a transfer of over 1 million shells that existed in stockpiles of non-Western countries like South Korea, Turkey, and South Africa. The Czech Republic led this effort, and Foreign Minister Jan Lipavsky said that the first 45,000 of these shells arrived in Ukraine in June, with an additional 100,000 arriving each in July and August. The new shells have reportedly already had a large impact. Thomas Kopechny, Prague's coordinator for the reconstruction of Ukraine, said that now, in some places along the 685-mile front, Ukrainian troops were outshooting their Russian counterparts. He did not specify which parts of the front this took place in. Prague hopes that the delivery of these shells will continue over the course of a couple of years. Because of the new drones and shells, Russian assaults on Ukrainian positions will be costlier and casualties will increase. Artillery shells in particular have caused 80% of the war's total casualties. With Russia losing at least some of its firepower advantage, its casualties will naturally grow. Trends in Russian recruitment and responses on the battlefield also indicate that Moscow is expecting an acceleration of casualties. In June, Putin claimed that 700,000 Russian troops were fighting in Ukraine, but because of its vast size and the war's high attrition rate, that's still likely not enough to meet the Kremlin's objectives. There are many signs that Putin is desperate for troops. In July, the Russian military raised its signing bonus to $22,000, a figure nearly double the one that prevailed at the end of 2023. The new bonus, added on top of the salary and other perks, equates to yearly benefits of about $60,750, although each region's salary may differ. This is a benefit package comparable to many positions in the United States Armed Forces. The new pay structure is now more lucrative than many other jobs in Russia as well, including in the critical oil and gas sector. Workers in that field are reportedly paid between $1,375 and $1,460 per month, depending on the source. The private sector in Russia is finding it difficult to compete with the military's new pay rates. The greater rewards for military service are attracting more Russian recruits, but are having negative effects in the wider economy. The energy sector is by far Russia's most important and has kept its economy afloat amid the storm of international sanctions. The resources being poured into the war, though, are now creating staff shortages in the energy sector and in other vital parts of the Russian economy. The increase in payments comes as Russian casualties mount, which makes it a sign of desperation for more troops. Another sign that Russian casualties are escalating is in the money it now needs to spend on caring for wounded soldiers and to compensate the families of dead troops. American researchers at Johns Hopkins and the Center for the National Interest think tank have estimated that these payments now make up 6% of Russia's annual budget, or $26 billion. It's part of military spending that now consumes about 40% of Russia's total yearly outlay. It's now easier for the military to conscript people. Under the new conscription regime, individuals will be sent notices through a digital government portal. Those who fail to show up for service can be punished, even if they do not have an account in that portal. Dissenting voices in Russia have called this system a new digital gulag. The age limit for reservists eligible to be mobilized has even been raised to 70. Russia's new tactics are also contributing to its increasing casualty rate. One of these new tactics is to send waves of head-on assaults against Ukrainian positions to discover where the artillery is. Ukrainian troops call these meat assaults. One officer described what it was like to face such an assault. The Russians use these units in most cases purely to see where our firing equipment is located and to constantly exhaust our units. Our guys stand in positions and fight, and when 4 or 5 waves of the enemy come at you in one day, which you have to destroy without end, it's very difficult, not only physically but also psychologically. Once the Ukrainian firepower is discovered, Russian tanks and artillery can be brought to bear to destroy it. However, while effective, these tactics are costly in terms of casualties. They therefore increase the demand on Russia to find new sources of manpower. Ukraine's new drones and artillery shells will make these tactics even costlier as ammunition shortages ease, at least a little. The demand for manpower will grow if Russia continues with these meat assaults, and there is only so much of it on hand in Putin's own territory. With domestic resistance likely to grow in response to new waves of mobilization, Putin has been forced to resort to unusual methods to satisfy his war machine's growing hunger for manpower. Aside from increasing the burden on its own population, Russia has looked abroad for more boots to put on Ukrainian ground. It's recently focused on recruiting foreign mercenaries, particularly on the African continent. Not coincidentally, the news about this effort started trickling in during the month of May, when Russia's casualty rate began to accelerate. Ukrainian intelligence sources report that Russia is focusing its efforts on 4 specific countries: Rwanda, Burundi, Congo, and Uganda. It's reportedly offering men from these countries a monthly salary of $2,200, more than the average annual incomes there. Additionally, Russia is offering a signing bonus of $2,000 health insurance, and Russian passports for new recruits and their families. The UK Ministry of Defence reported that the so-called Africa Corps, consisting partially of these men, was spotted fighting in the Kharkiv region in mid-May. Russia has resorted to other methods to acquire foreign troops, including coercing students studying there and forming human trafficking rings. In the latter case, Russian agents reportedly lured Indian men into roles as helpers for the military. They then underwent training, which involved being sent to the front. These foreign troops probably won't survive for long. Knowing Russia, they will be the first to get sent into the meat grinder, just as it did with the reservists it mobilized in late 2022. However, this method of fighting suits Russia's traditional way of war just fine. Putin's regime seems to realize that it cannot now win the conflict in a decisive battle, and is ruthlessly sacrificing troops to grind Ukraine into submission because it can take more losses. As long as he can keep pushing troops into the meat grinder, Putin will continue to struggle forward, regardless of the costs. For him, it's politically necessary to not leave Ukraine empty-handed. The survival of his regime is at stake. Unfortunately for Putin, all of these new men are still likely not enough to change the character of the war or to mitigate Russian casualties. During NATO's July summit in Washington, one official speaking to Reuters mentioned that Russia lacked the troops it needed to conduct broader offensive operations. The Russian war machine had no choice but to continue as it was. To make matters worse for Russia, its forces seem to be suffering a glut in firepower too. For the moment, Russia is making or procuring more artillery shells than Ukraine and its allies. However, Putin's visit to Pyongyang in June was not a coincidence. Despite increases in domestic production, Russia too has relied on partners to get the shells it needs to sustain its offensive. The same NATO official also told Reuters that Russia lacked the ammunition it needed to launch an offensive capable of securing large swathes of Ukrainian territory, which is why it's resorted to grinding forward in small operations at high cost. To launch proper offensives, Russia would need to secure additional ammunition from countries beyond North Korea and Iran. With China reluctant to supply its troublesome junior strategic partner with military aid, it's unlikely that Russia will find a country capable of giving it the level of support it would need to change the war's tempo. The NATO official mentioned that Ukraine's defenses have improved significantly this year, which is making Russian assaults costlier. Russia, for all its firepower, simply is not getting enough shells per day to suppress these defenses in the way it needs to mitigate its losses. With these facts in mind, General Walker predicted that Russia would suffer casualties not seen in modern times. If things continue as they are, Britain's new top general said that Russia can expect to lose 1.5 million to 1.8 million men over the 5 years it would take to capture the 4 oblasts. However, this astronomical figure is contingent upon Ukraine's armed forces continuing to sustain the defense they are currently putting up. Such a defense relies on recurrent aid from Ukraine's Western partners, especially in the form of artillery shells. Ukraine's shell hunger may not be as bad as it was earlier in the year, as troops at the front report they have seen fresh supplies. Still, they fear it's not enough. The Czech Republic, which played the leading part in finding the 155mm ammunition in the winter and brokering its transfer, warned that the initial target of 800,000 shells before the end of the year would fall short by a third if 3 of the 18 European countries involved in the deal, which have not been named, do not put up the money they agreed to. So far, they've been negligent. General Walker's prediction also assumes that Russia would not significantly increase its manpower advantage over Ukraine. Although he is still short, Putin is showing that he's willing to think outside the box and use the full extent of his arbitrary, dictatorial powers to find the necessary troops. The only thing he's been reluctant to do so far is to send mass conscription notices to people in the major population centers of Russia's European heartland. He fears a political backlash if people from Moscow and St. Petersburg see too many coffins or maimed troops returning to their communities. But a dictator in desperation will tend to throw even these kinds of boundaries to the wind if the need arises. An increase in Russian manpower would deplete Ukraine's precious ammunition faster. And although the Czech initiative is meeting some success, it's not certain. The European Union will also likely be unable to fulfill the promises it made of delivering 1 million domestically produced artillery shells to Ukraine in 2024. Walker was quick to point out the stakes involved for the West. He warned that failing to defeat Russia in Ukraine would mean a much bigger security threat down the line. The lesson from history is that the Russians don't forget, and they will come back to get their revenge. Even if Putin is defeated in Ukraine, Walker said that the West could not dismiss the possibility that his regime would still seek this revenge, for understandable reasons, when viewed from a historical and geopolitical perspective. Even if Putin succeeds in capturing the 4 oblasts, such an outcome would not bring Russia significantly closer to accomplishing its geopolitical objectives in Europe, which are to acquire naturally defensible frontiers, shorten its long border with NATO, and create a buffer for the all-important Volgograd Gap. the narrow territorial stretch between the Black and Caspian Seas that connects the Russian heartland with the Caucasus. This area was a target for Germany in both world wars, and Moscow has been protective of it ever since. During the Soviet Union, the Volgograd Gap had the protection of a large buffer, which evaporated after 1991. Russia's invasion of Ukraine was in large part an attempt to restore the territorial protection it had during Soviet times. Recapturing the 4 eastern oblasts at the price of 1.5 million or more casualties does not go far enough in accomplishing this objective. It counts more as a humiliating Pyrrhic victory than anything else. The desire for revenge is natural in such circumstances. For these reasons, Walker warned that Britain would need to be prepared to fight a high-intensity war within 3 years. He speculated that by 2027, 3 threats to the West could converge. These would be the continued Russian aggression in Eastern Europe, a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, and Iran's nuclear ambitions. North Korea represents an additional security challenge for the West and its allies in Asia. General Walker said that these 4 powers were establishing more and more of a mutual transactional relationship and would be more likely to come to one another's aid if one found itself being hard-pressed. Walker concluded, by 2027 or 28, this convergence may have reached some sort of singularity, and your ability to deal with them in isolation is significantly diminished because a problem in one area is likely to trigger a sympathetic detonation in another, and therefore it's a global problem looked at from different perspectives around the world. Walker's prognosis is a reminder that the West is facing down a determined group of dictators that care little for their own people and are willing to suffer enormous losses if it means increasing their power. Putin's willingness to take over 1.5 million casualties in Ukraine is proof enough of that. When you're a dictator who can't win any other way, it's just part of doing business. What do you think of the state of the war in Ukraine? Will the casualty figures that General Walker expects become a reality? Will the threat in Ukraine converge with threats elsewhere as Russia makes a united front with China, North Korea, and Iran? Don't forget to let us know in the comments. Also, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more military analysis from military experts. Now go and check out the true death toll of the Ukrainian war, or click this other video instead.